He burned the journal to save her, but the ashes only made the truth harder to breathe. That sentence would replay in Marta's mind months later, when the quiet order of her life unraveled. For now, it began with something deceptively ordinary, the death of her father. His funeral was small, muted, nothing like the man he once was, loud, stubborn, and prone to long arguments over nothing. Neighbors said he mellowed in his later years, but Marta knew better. The silence that replaced his rants was not peace. It was bitterness turned inward. After the ceremony, while her brother Daniel handled the condolences with forced charm, Marta retreated to the house she grew up in. The walls still carried the smell of old paper and tobacco, and as she moved through the dim-lit hallway, she felt as though the house was holding its breath. She hadn't expected to find anything. She only wanted to sit in his chair, maybe hold on to a shirt that still carried his scent. Instead, in the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet, one she had never seen opened before, she found it. A leather-bound journal, edges frayed, smelling faintly of smoke though it had been untouched for years. At first glance, it looked like the scribbles of an old man, complaints about neighbors, notes on debts, reminders about who borrowed what. But as Marta turned the pages, her breath caught. The writing shifted from trivialities into something sharper. There were names, familiar names. Mr. Harrington, who ran the hardware store. Mrs. Klein, who lived across the street and used to babysit Marta as a child. Even her Uncle Robert. Next to each name, there were descriptions, not of events, but of orchestrations. Ensure Harrington's bid fails. Tell Robert about the false account. Let Klein hear about Anna's drinking. The more Marta read, the more it felt like the town itself had been a chessboard, and her father had been the player moving pieces, ruining reputations, and whispering lies. She sat back, journal open on her lap, a tremor running through her hands. These weren't just observations, they were instructions. Her father hadn't just held grudges. He had cultivated them, turned them into plans, executed them with precision. A knock at the door startled her. Daniel entered, his face pale from too much whiskey and grief. His eyes fell instantly on the book. "What's that?" "A journal," Marta answered cautiously. "Dad's." Daniel's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 2 steps, yanked the journal from her hands, and skimmed the pages. His reaction was immediate, visceral. He slammed the book shut, his knuckles white. "This doesn't leave this room," he hissed. "Do you understand me?" "Why? What's in there, Daniel? Did you know about this?" "Don't be naive," he snapped, but his eyes flickered with something beyond anger, fear. Dad was complicated. He did what he had to do. Marta shook her head, her voice trembling. "These aren't just grudges. He destroyed people. For what? For pride? For fun?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the fireplace. Marta rose instantly, alarm surging through her. "Don't," she pleaded. "Daniel, don't you dare." But it was too late. He tossed the journal into the flames. The leather cover curled, the pages blackened, the ink bled into smoke. Marta's chest constricted as though the fire consumed not just paper but air itself. She lunged forward, but Daniel held her back with surprising strength. "You think you want the truth," he muttered, his face illuminated by the glow. "But you don't. Some things are poison. They'll kill you if you swallow them." Marta struggled in his grip, eyes fixed on the journal as it disintegrated. The names, the schemes, the carefully documented malice, all turning to ash. Her father's secrets rising in gray curls toward the ceiling. And yet, even as she watched, Marta knew the truth hadn't burned away. It had only scattered, embedded in her mind, impossible to erase. Later, when the fire had dimmed and Daniel had left, muttering about protecting what's left of this family, Marta sat alone in the silent room. Ashes covered the hearth, but one fragment remained intact, a corner of a page, edges singed but words still visible. She picked it up with trembling fingers. 3 words stared back at her, written in her father's sharp, deliberate hand. "She will know." Marta's pulse thundered in her ears. Who was she? Did it mean her? Or someone else entirely? The fragment crumbled slightly between her fingertips, as fragile as the certainty she once had about her father, her brother, and the town she thought she understood. The quiet of the house no longer felt like mourning. It felt like warning. And Marta, against every instinct telling her to let it go, knew she could not leave it alone. The fragment haunted Marta. She will know. The words replayed in her mind every time she tried to sleep, echoing louder than her father's absence, louder than Daniel's warning. She couldn't ignore it. She didn't want to admit it aloud, but the truth was simple. She needed to know what her father had done and why he left behind that single ominous phrase. The ashes might have erased the evidence, but Marta had held enough pages in her hands to remember names, and names meant witnesses. The next morning, long before Daniel stirred from his whiskey-soaked grief, Marta slipped out of the house and headed down the street toward the Harrington's hardware store. The bell above the door chimed when she entered, its cheerful note clashing with the tension in her chest. Mr. Harrington, older now but still broad-shouldered, looked up from the counter. His smile faltered when he saw her. "Marta," he said slowly, as if tasting the name for poison. "Been a long time." She forced a polite nod. "I wanted to ask you something about my father." His jaw tightened. He set down the box of screws he'd been organizing. "Don't," he said flatly. "You don't want to stir that up." "I found his journal," Marta pressed, lowering her voice. "Your name was in it. There was something about making your bid fail. What did that mean?" For a moment, Harrington's eyes flared with a mix of fear and anger. He leaned closer across the counter, his voice a harsh whisper. "You don't understand what kind of man your father was. He cost me my business, my reputation, everything. And he did it with a smile." "But why?" Marta asked, desperate. "Why target you?" Harrington's hands trembled as he stacked the box back on the shelf. "Because I said no. He wanted something I wouldn't give him. And when someone said no, he made sure they paid for it." He turned away sharply, shutting the conversation like a slammed door. "That's all you need to know. Now leave it buried." Marta left the store with her pulse racing. Harrington hadn't just confirmed the journal's authenticity. He had made it clear her father's manipulations were personal, vindictive. She tried to steady herself, but everywhere she looked, she saw shadows of her father's reach. The Klein house across the street with its sagging porch, once bright with flowers, now lifeless. Uncle Robert's barn at the edge of town, locked and abandoned. Every ruin whispered her father's name. That evening, Daniel confronted her. "Where were you?" he demanded, eyes bloodshot, voice sharp. "You went to Harrington, didn't you?" "How do you know?" Marta shot back. His lips curved into a bitter smile. "Because people talk in this town, and they don't want the past dragged up. They came to me, told me to keep you in line." Marta's stomach dropped. "They came to you? Who?" "Doesn't matter," Daniel said. "What matters is that you stop. Right now, Dad's gone. Let the dead stay buried." "And if I don't?" she challenged, anger breaking through her fear. Daniel's face hardened. "Then you won't just be fighting ghosts, Marta. You'll be fighting the whole town." His words weren't a threat, they were a warning. And yet, the defiance inside her only grew stronger. That night, she sat by the fireplace, staring into the ashes, imagining the lost words of the journal rising like smoke around her. If the town wanted silence, that meant the truth was dangerous. And if it was dangerous, then it mattered. She decided to follow the next lead, Mrs. Klein. The woman had always been kind when Marta was little, baking pies for neighborhood children, singing hymns from her porch. But now her house was dark, the windows draped, the air heavy with neglect. Marta knocked once, twice, before the door creaked open. Mrs. Klein stood there, gaunt, eyes sharp despite her age. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. Marta swallowed hard. "I need to know what my father did to you." The old woman's expression twisted, part grief, part rage. "What he did. He took my daughter from me. Not with his hands, no, with his words. He spread lies until nobody would hire her, nobody would speak to her. She drank herself into an early grave while he sat across the street and watched." Marta's knees weakened. "Why would he do that?" Mrs. Klein's voice cracked like broken glass. "Because your mother once refused him a favor. That's all it took. A small slight, and he destroyed us." Marta wanted to deny it, wanted to defend the father she thought she knew, but the conviction in Mrs. Klein's voice shattered any illusion. She stepped back, murmured an apology, and left before the woman could slam the door. By the time she reached the street, her head was spinning. Every story painted her father not as a victim of bitterness, but as a deliberate architect of cruelty. The phrase, "she will know," gnawed at her again. Had her father expected her to discover this legacy? Was it a warning or an invitation? As she walked home, the whispers began. Neighbors she had known all her life watched her with narrowed eyes. Conversations fell silent when she passed. And when she reached the house, a slip of paper was waiting on the porch. In bold, uneven letters it read, "Stop digging, or you'll end up like them." Marta's breath caught. Her hands shook as she clutched the note. It wasn't just Daniel, or Harrington, or Mrs. Klein. The entire town was invested in keeping the truth hidden. She stared into the dark street, knowing someone was watching. The walls were closing in, but she felt something ignite inside her, not fear, but resolve. If her father had built this web of malice, then she would tear it apart strand by strand, even if the whole town stood against her. The note burned in Marta's pocket as if it had been written in fire. She lay awake all night, the house too quiet, Daniel's door locked and silent. She wanted to confront him again, to demand whether he had seen the note or written it himself, but deep down she knew it wasn't his style. Daniel's weapon was silence, not threats scrawled in black ink. By dawn, Marta had made up her mind. She wasn't going to stop. If the whole town wanted her blind, then she would pry her eyes open wider. She retraced her father's footsteps through memories, through places where his presence lingered even in absence, until her path carried her to the edge of town where the old train depot stood. It had been boarded up for years, long before she left, but she remembered whispers that her father kept things there, boxes, papers, things no one else was meant to see. She pulled at the boards until her hands splintered, slipping through the gap into the stale air of abandonment. Dust and silence smothered the space, but in the far corner, half hidden beneath a moth-eaten tarp, stood a crate. She pried it open. Inside were ledgers, receipts, pages bound together with string. The ink was faded, but the names were familiar. Harrington, Klein, Roberts, dozens more. Each entry marked with notes, debts, favors, betrayals, all recorded with cold precision. Her father had been keeping score like a god tallying sins. Marta's stomach twisted, but before she could take more than a few pages, a sound echoed from behind her. A footstep. She spun around, heart hammering. A figure emerged from the shadows, thin, wiry, with sharp eyes beneath a mess of unkempt hair. He raised his hands. "Don't scream. I'm not here to hurt you." "Who are you?" Marta demanded, clutching the papers to her chest. He hesitated before answering. "Elliot. I knew your father." The name meant nothing to her, but his voice carried an intensity that pinned her in place. "You're making a mistake digging through his past," he warned. "These people will bury you if they think you'll expose them." Marta's anger flared. "Then why are you here?" Elliot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because I don't want to see you end up like the others. I worked with him once. I know what he was capable of, and what the town allowed him to do." "You think he acted alone?" "No. They all played their part. They wanted what he could give them, and when he turned cruel, they stayed quiet. Some even helped." Marta's breath caught. "You mean the town wasn't just his victim?" Elliot nodded grimly. "They were complicit. Every destroyed life, every broken family. It wasn't just your father's hand. It was their silence, their greed, their fear." He pulled something from his coat and held it out to her. A small notebook, battered and stained, its pages filled with cramped writing. "I kept this. Records of the meetings, the payoffs. I thought maybe one day the truth should come out. Maybe that day is now." Marta took the notebook with trembling hands. Proof. Harder proof than ashes or memories. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this. But Elliot's expression remained grim. "You don't understand, Marta. If you push this too far, they'll close ranks. You'll be an enemy, not just of your father's memory, but of everyone who profited from it. They'll ruin you the way they ruined the others." Marta swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "Then help me. Don't just warn me, stand with me." Silence stretched between them until Elliot finally sighed. "All right, but you need to be smart. Take it slow. One wrong move, and you'll be the next obituary in the paper." They agreed to meet again in secret. As she left the depot, clutching the notebook tight against her chest, Marta felt both exhilarated and terrified. She had an ally now, but also a new weight, responsibility. The truth was no longer just whispers. It had shape, ink, undeniable evidence. Yet even as her resolve strengthened, fate reminded her of its cruelty. When she returned home, she found Daniel waiting on the porch, his face pale, eyes blazing with something between fury and fear. In his hand was the note she had hidden in her drawer. "You think I wouldn't find this?" he snapped. Do you know what you're doing, Marta? Do you know what they'll do if you keep pushing? She stood tall, refusing to shrink back. I know exactly what I'm doing. For once, I'm not going to pretend our father was a good man. He destroyed people, Daniel. He destroyed lives. Daniel's voice cracked. He was our father. And that's supposed to excuse it? She shot back. Do you want to inherit his silence, his lies? Because I won't. Daniel's hand shook as he crushed the note into a fist. If you keep this up, don't expect me to protect you. Don't expect anyone to. He stormed inside, leaving her trembling on the porch. Her heart ached, but she couldn't stop now. That night, she read Elliot's notebook cover to cover. It was worse than she imagined. Lists of transactions, coded notes about favors exchanged, threats delivered, even hints of violence that no one had ever connected to her father. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, but one entry stood out, circled in ink so dark it bled through the page. September 14th, agreement sealed. She will know. Marta froze. The phrase again. The same phrase her father had written in the burned journal. But this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Her breath hitched as realization struck. This wasn't about chance. Her father had planned for her to discover this, as if her entire life had been drawn toward this moment. But why? Was it guilt? Punishment? Or something more twisted? That he wanted her to carry his burden, to feel the weight of his sins crushing her shoulders? She slammed the notebook shut, shaking with fury and confusion. For the first time, the truth terrified her. Not just because of what her father had done, but because he had chosen her to inherit it. And now, with Elliot's help, she was closer than ever to uncovering the full scope of the darkness. But the walls were already pressing in. The neighbors' stares grew sharper, more hostile. Whispers turned to threats. And in the dead of night, as she tried to rest, she thought she heard footsteps outside her window, lingering too long before fading into silence. Marta barely slept, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her mind thrashing like a storm-tossed sea. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the words circled in Elliot's notebook, September 14th, agreement sealed. She will know. It was as if her father had reached through the grave and scripted her future, leaving her no escape. The days that followed blurred into a haze of fear and defiance. She met Elliot again, this time at the edge of the abandoned quarry, where rusted machinery sat like skeletons beneath the sun. He handed her another stack of notes he'd hidden away, this one describing in sickening detail the methods her father used to control people: blackmail, bribery, threats that sometimes ended in violence. Marta clutched the pages with shaking hands, torn between gratitude and horror. But soon Elliot's warnings proved true. Neighbors who once offered half-hearted smiles now turned their faces away. People whispered when she entered the store, eyes darting like knives. Her boss at the diner where she picked up shifts told her perhaps she should take some time off, the words coded in false kindness, but heavy with threat. Even Daniel grew colder, refusing to speak to her except in clipped sentences, his silences louder than any accusation. She felt the walls of the town closing in, as though every corner, every glance, every whisper was part of a conspiracy to bury her. One evening, she walked home to find the front door ajar, though she was certain she had locked it that morning. She stepped inside and froze. The living room was untouched, but when she reached her bedroom, she found the drawers open, the journal and Elliot's notebook thrown across the floor as if someone had searched them. A chill ran through her veins. Whoever had broken in hadn't taken anything. They only wanted her to know they had been there. She sank to her knees, gathering the pages with trembling hands, fighting back sobs. When Daniel came home and saw the mess, he stared at her with cold eyes. "You should stop this, Marta. You're dragging us both into something we can't survive." She wanted to scream at him, to beg him to stand with her, but the words stuck in her throat. She realized with growing dread that her brother was slipping away, and soon she might have no one left. That night she lit every lamp in the house, afraid of the shadows pressing against the windows. Hours stretched until dawn, and with the first light came another blow. A letter slipped under the door, no envelope, just a sheet of paper with a single line written in block letters. "If you show anyone else, you will join him." Her hands shook so violently she dropped the note. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was a death threat. Marta stumbled outside, gasping for air, her mind spinning. Who was behind this? Was it one of the names in the ledger? A neighbor who once owed her father everything? Or worse, several of them working together to silence her? The paranoia ate at her until even the sound of a car backfiring sent her heart lurching. When she met Elliot again, desperation leaked into her voice. They're watching me. They broke into the house. They want me gone. Elliot's jaw tightened, his eyes dark. I warned you, Marta. Once you start pulling at threads, the whole fabric begins to tear. They'll do anything to protect themselves. She clutched his arm, pleading. Then what do I do? Do I stop? Do I give up? For a long moment he said nothing, then his voice dropped to a whisper. If you give up, they win. But if you keep going, you need to be ready to lose everything. His words lodged in her chest like knives. That night, another blow came. She returned home to find Daniel gone, his room stripped of clothes, the closet emptied. On the kitchen table, he left a short note scrawled in his handwriting. I can't watch you destroy yourself. Don't look for me. Marta's knees buckled. The last piece of her family had abandoned her. She curled on the floor, the silence of the house pressing against her until it felt like suffocation. For hours she lay there, staring at nothing, too numb even to cry. The following days brought no reprieve. At the diner she found her job permanently terminated. A stranger followed her home from the store, disappearing only when she ducked into a neighbor's yard. Anonymous phone calls came late at night, heavy breathing on the line before the caller hung up. The pressure built until Marta felt like she was walking through a nightmare she could not wake from. The notebooks lay on her desk, each page screaming with truths, but now they looked less like weapons and more like anchors dragging her into the abyss. She thought about burning them, about ending this before it ended her, but every time she reached for the matches, her father's words echoed in her head. She will know. She will know. It was both a curse and a command. On the 7th night since Daniel left, Marta stood at the window, staring into the darkness. A figure moved just beyond the fence, too far to identify, but close enough that she could feel the gaze. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and that was when the first rock shattered the glass. She screamed, ducking as shards rained across the floor. Another rock followed, then silence. When she rushed outside with a flashlight, the street was empty, the night holding its breath. She stood there barefoot on the pavement, shaking, her lights swinging wildly across the shadows, but whoever had been there was gone. For the first time, Marta felt not just fear but despair, the crushing weight of inevitability. She realized the fight was no longer about truth or justice, but about survival, and she was losing. Alone, hunted, stripped of allies, she collapsed onto the porch steps, clutching Elliot's notebook to her chest. Tears blurred her vision. And in that moment, for the first time since her father's death, she whispered the thought she had refused to admit. Maybe they were right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. Maybe the truth wasn't worth the cost. As the night closed in, Marta felt the last shreds of her strength slipping away, leaving her hollow and trembling, perched at the edge of surrender. The breaking point came the morning Marta found Elliot's notebook missing. She had fallen asleep on the couch, her body too weak to climb to her bed, and when she awoke, the desk was bare. Panic ripped through her as she tore through every drawer, every corner, but it was gone. Whoever had been watching her had finally acted. Her breath came ragged, her hands clawing at the floorboards as though she could pry the book back from the earth. But then, tucked under the lamp, she found a scrap of paper with an address scrawled in a familiar hand. It was Elliot's writing. Her stomach lurched. She didn't know if it was a trap or a lifeline, but it was all she had left. As the sun set that evening, Marta walked the long road to the edge of town, the address leading her to an abandoned grain warehouse, its windows boarded, its walls peeling under years of neglect. She hesitated at the door, the silence around her heavy, and then pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rusted metal. A single bulb swung from a wire, casting long shadows. Elliot stood beneath it, the notebook clutched in his hands. His face was drawn, his eyes sharp with something between fury and fear. You shouldn't have kept going, he said, his voice low, as though the walls themselves could overhear. You don't understand what you've stirred up. Marta stepped forward, her voice cracking. You knew all along. You fed me pieces, just enough to keep me digging, and now they've taken everything from me. Daniel's gone, my job, my life, why? Elliot's hands tightened around the notebook. Because the truth matters. But the truth has a price, Marta. I needed you to see it, to feel it, because you're the only one who can burn this whole thing down. His words struck like lightning. She stared at him, trembling. Burn it down? They'll kill me. Elliot's expression hardened. They're going to kill you anyway. But if you take them with you, at least it means something. He tossed the notebook onto the floor between them. Pages spilled open, names, dates, transactions, every dirty secret her father had kept. Marta dropped to her knees, her eyes scanning the evidence, her breath shaking. But before she could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, faces obscured, but their intent unmistakable. One carried a crowbar, another a length of chain, the third simply cracked his knuckles. Marta's chest constricted. She looked at Elliot, but he didn't flinch, his eyes locked on hers. This is it, he whispered. They can't let you leave. The men advanced, their voices a low growl. You should have left it alone, girl. Your father knew how this worked. He kept balance. Now you're tipping everything over. Marta backed away, her hands brushing the spilled pages, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. The crowbar man stepped closer, raising the iron in his grip. In that instant, something broke inside her, not from fear, but from the realization that surrender would mean her father's sins swallowed her whole, erasing her until nothing of her remained. She lunged for the notebook, clutching it to her chest, and screamed, "If you touch me, the whole world will know." Her voice echoed through the cavernous space, trembling but fierce. The men paused, exchanging looks, and that hesitation was all she needed. Marta bolted toward the stairwell, her feet pounding against the concrete. Behind her, footsteps thundered in pursuit, Elliot shouting her name. She scrambled up to the second floor, weaving between rusted machinery, her lungs burning, until she found herself at the edge of a broken catwalk. Below yawned the warehouse floor, jagged metal strewn across it. She turned, the men closing in, Elliot trailing behind, torn between helping and betraying. One of the men sneered. Nowhere left to run. Marta's grip tightened on the notebook. Her mind raced, every choice a blade. If she leapt, she might die. If she stayed, they would beat her until she begged for mercy that wouldn't come. But then she saw it. A rusted control panel, still faintly wired to the ancient grain conveyor. She dashed for it, slamming the lever with all her strength. Sparks erupted, machinery grinding to life with a roar. The belt lurched, spilling decades of dust and grain husks into the air, creating a choking storm. Visibility shrank to inches, and in the chaos Marta hurled the notebook into the open conveyor chute. One of the men cursed, lunging after it, but too late. The machine devoured the pages, spitting fragments into the air like confetti. Marta screamed over the grinding metal, her voice raw. It's not just me anymore. It's out there now. You can't stop it. Whether her words were truth or bluff, she didn't know. But in that moment, she believed them with every shattered piece of her soul. The men surged forward, but Elliot threw himself in their path, fists flying, buying her seconds she didn't have. Marta ran, leaping from the catwalk to a lower beam, pain ripping through her ankle as she landed hard. She crawled toward the exit, her body bruised, her vision blurring, until cold night air struck her face. Behind her, shouts and the crash of fists echoed. She staggered into the road, clutching her side, her breath ragged, her mind spinning with only one thought. She had destroyed the evidence, but maybe, just maybe, she had also unleashed something larger than herself. A car's headlights swept across her, blinding. For a second, she thought it was another enemy, but the vehicle screeched to a halt. The door swung open, and Daniel stepped out, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. "Marta, what the hell?" She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, the words spilling out between gasps. "They're trying to kill me. Father's secrets, they'll never stop." Daniel held her, torn between fury and fear, and when he glanced back at the warehouse, smoke rising from the machinery inside, his face hardened. "Then we don't stop either." In that instant, Marta understood the choice before her. She could run, vanish into the night, bury the past, and maybe survive. Or she could stand with Daniel, drag the darkness into the light, and pay whatever price came. There was no safe path left, only fire and ruin. Her father's curse had become her inheritance. As the night deepened around them, Marta wiped the blood from her face, lifted her chin, and whispered, "Then we finish this." The warehouse burned long into the night, flames curling through the rusted beams, the smoke rising black against the stars. Marta and Daniel watched from the ridge, their clothes torn, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. Sirens wailed in the distance, but no help would come for them, not truly. The fire would be written off as an accident, just another ruin collapsing into ash. The names, the dates, the secrets, if they weren't already gone, they soon would be. Marta felt the weight of the notebook's absence like a phantom limb. She had destroyed the one thing that could have proven everything. Yet in doing so, she had made sure it could never be used against her either. "It's over," Daniel whispered, but she shook her head. "No, it's never over." The words scraped her throat raw, because she understood now. The journal had been more than paper and ink. It was a living thing, feeding on silence, thriving in darkness. The fire hadn't killed it. It had only scattered it. Those who had hunted her would retreat into their holes, but they would not forget. They would rebuild. And someday, they would come again. Still, a strange calm settled over her. Perhaps the truth didn't need a single book to survive. Perhaps it was already loose in whispers, in the fear etched into the faces of the men who had chased her. Perhaps, by standing against them, she had turned her father's legacy into something else, something dangerous to them. She turned to Daniel, her eyes glassy but fierce. "We can't go back. If we try to live like before, they'll find us. We either run or we fight." Daniel's jaw tightened. Running's not living. He slipped his arm around her, steadying her as her ankle throbbed. They descended from the ridge, their shadows long in the firelight. Marta thought of her mother, the half-truths, the nights of silence at the dinner table when her father's phone rang and voices lowered. She thought of Elliot, who had stood between her and death only to vanish into the chaos, leaving her with no certainty if he was dead or alive. A pang of guilt twisted through her. Had she betrayed him by feeding the journal to the flames, or had she honored him by ensuring no one else could wield it? The question clawed at her as they reached Daniel's car. She slid into the passenger seat, the leather cold against her bruised skin. Daniel drove in silence, the road stretching endless into the night. Town lights faded behind them, swallowed by trees and fields, until all that remained was the hum of the engine and Marta's racing thoughts. At last, Daniel spoke, his voice low, heavy. "What if we go to the press? Even without the journal, we know things. We can tell them." Marta stared at her hands, her fingernails caked with soot. "They'll twist it. Call us liars. Without proof, we're nothing but noise." A bitter laugh slipped from her. "That's what Father always said. Truth doesn't matter unless you can prove it." Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. "Then what do we do?" She turned to the window, watching the darkness blur past. "We wait. We watch. We gather more. And when the time comes, we strike." The conviction in her own voice startled her. For so long, she had been running, clawing for scraps, drowning in secrets. Now, for the first time, she felt control flicker in her chest. Not freedom, not peace, but something like power. And it terrified her as much as it steadied her. Hours later, they pulled into an old motel off the highway. The neon sign flickered, casting them in sickly light. Inside, the room smelled of dust and bleach. Marta sank onto the bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling while Daniel bolted the door. The adrenaline drained from her body, leaving only exhaustion and the ache of wounds too deep to see. She closed her eyes and saw the warehouse again, the faces, the smoke, the journal being devoured by the machine. She heard Elliot's voice, "The truth has a price." She wondered if she had paid it, or if the debt was still waiting, crouched in the dark. Sleep came in fits, broken by nightmares. In one, her father stood at the foot of her bed, the journal in his hand, its pages bleeding ink that spread like veins across the floor. In another, Daniel was dragged away into shadows, his screams muffled by unseen hands. She woke gasping, her skin slick with sweat. The motel clock read 3:17 a.m. She sat up, pulling the thin curtain aside. The parking lot was empty except for Daniel's car, but she felt eyes watching her, always watching. She pressed her forehead to the glass and whispered, "I won't let you win." It was unclear if she spoke to her father, the men from the warehouse, or herself. When dawn finally came, pale and colorless, Marta dressed in silence. Daniel was still asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. She stood over him for a long moment, torn. Part of her wanted to slip away, to vanish, to spare him from the storm she carried. But another part, the stronger part, knew she couldn't do it alone. She touched his shoulder gently. His eyes opened, weary but resolute. "We move again?" he asked. She nodded. "We move." And so they did, their lives becoming a series of roads and shadows, a hunt both endless and aimless. Some nights they spoke of the future, of places far away where no one knew their names. Other nights they sat in silence, each lost in ghosts. But always, the fire in Marta's chest grew. The journal was gone, but its ghost lived inside her. And she knew, one day, it would demand its reckoning. Whether she would survive that reckoning, or whether it would consume her, was a question she dared not answer. For now, all she could do was keep walking into the dark, Daniel at her side, the burden of truth heavy but hers to carry. And somewhere in the night, in the unseen places where power festers, the enemies who had hunted her whispered her name. They were waiting, watching, preparing. And Marta, battered but unbroken, whispered back into the silence, "So am I."